we've seen over the last few days is the end of the Labour Party's relationship with the white working class. It's finished, it's over, it's done. Of that entire red wall, I will predict there will not be a single Labour seat left in it in a future general election. And Starmer, of course, represents that worst, that as in so many other ways, continental tendency. And he is every single thing he says, he does, everything that Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, does, makes things worse. It's finished, it's over, it's done. But I think we're going to see increasing clashes between ethnic groups, Hindu and Pakistani, Hindu Muslim, and I'm afraid between whites and everybody else. Ever since Enoch Powell's River of Blood speech, the language of which was overblown, but the points that he made were absolutely true, and are being proved true even as we speak now. Unfortunately, the decision was taken that you simply shut people up. If you do not debate a question, if you do not discuss it, if you do everything you can to make it undiscussable, then I'm afraid it's like a sore in the body. It's an untreated wound. It becomes deeper and deeper and more septic until finally it bursts horribly to the surface. And I'm using a deliberately foul metaphor because what's going on now is foul. Threatening to burn people alive, which is what it amounts to, is monstrous. That sort of rioting is monstrous. But the fact that it's monstrous doesn't mean that there are not real reasons for it. And it's all very well. Starmer is a natural authoritarian. And one of the things we need to talk about, he presents himself as a policeman. We've never had a prime minister who presented himself as a policeman before. We had a great prime minister, Robert Peel, who invented our police force, but with the deliberate idea it was not by force, it was not by violence, it wasn't by water cannons, it was by consent. It wasn't neo-military, it wasn't an army of occupation. We're talking about a tragedy. We're talking about a profound world-scale tragedy, which is why Elon Musk's language is not inappropriate. The Britain I grew up in was the most peaceful, the most gentle, homogeneous society that has ever existed. Why we did not need identity cards, why there are extraordinarily low levels of crime, such high levels of public trust. That has been destroyed. It has been deliberately destroyed by Tony Blair and New Labour with this absurd notion that they were going to force us to become multi-ethnic for our good. They were going to rub the noses of the whites in the dirt. And sorry, we've got to understand that. It is an act of such inconceivable national self-harm. As I've said, Starmer represents an intensely authoritarian streak. Again, people get very confused here. Because Starmer was a human rights lawyer, they think he's sort of all soft and cuddly, because human rights are really nice, aren't they? But what we've got to remember is that the sort of human rights that Starmer represents are the rights only of minorities. This is the terrifying thing. Democracy has been stood on its head. Democracy means the rule of the majority. It's now completely inverted to mean the protection of every exotic minority you can think of against the majority. And the only way you can protect them is by aggressive policing, the sort of behaviour that we saw from Mark Rowley, Sir Mark Rowley, the as it were, overnighted, in every sense of the word, overnighted Metropolitan Police Commissioner. When he's asked a question about two-tier policing, what does this arrogant do? He strikes the head of the microphone out of the journalist's hand. The sheer contemptuous arrogance. Because again, what we've got to understand too, Steve, is that we really do have two-tier policing in every possible way. It's not simply that a Muslim demonstration will be policed differently from white, then there's no such thing as the EDL, but let's use the word for just the moment. It's not simply that it will be policed differently, but the entire language has been perverted. Have you heard constantly this word community? Now, what is this wonderful community whose values we are preserving are? What they are sub-ethnic groups, not simply Bangladeshi, not simply Muslim. They're extraordinarily Romani, the most persistently anti-legal, as it were, anti that sort of society that we just both described now, the picture of England in the 1950s. Those are specially protected groups. The police handle them with kid gloves, as we saw in Rochdale, as we saw in Leeds. Not only do they handle them with kid gloves, they actually negotiate with them catastrophically as groups with community leaders, unelected, self-generated. There's only one group, Stephen, that is not allowed to do that, and it's the white working class. And this is why they are rebelling. They are not allowed to have a community. They are not allowed to have their community leaders consulted. Again, you see, there are huge questions behind this. One of the things, again, I want to put two or three of these big questions because nobody else has done it. What we're seeing now is a movement in the political tectonic plates on a scale that has not taken place since the end of the First World War and the replacement of the Liberal Party by the Labour Party. What we've seen over the last few days is the end of the Labour Party's relationship with the white working class. It's finished, it's over, it's done. Of that entire red wall, I will predict there will not be a single Labour seat left in it in a future general election. The question is, where does that vote go? Traditionally, it would go to the Conservative Party. The greatest Conservative Prime Minister, who isn't Churchill, it's Disraeli, says the Conservative Party is a national party or it's nothing. We need, I'm going to say these words out loud, we need an English national party. Why is it such a wicked thing to say? Because there's a Scottish National Party, there's a Welsh National Party. They're both rabidly pro-immigrant and anti-English. Are they not? I mean, the evidence of Scotland is overwhelming. The entire thing is driven by a bizarre sort of anti-Englishness, a deliberate separation of two peoples who have got along extraordinarily well to their extraordinary mutual benefit ever since the Act of Union. That's been ruptured. So there is this huge English question which has to be confronted. Tam Dael, back in the old days, he put it simply constitutionally, it was known as the West Lothian question. Why is it that Scottish MPs can vote on English laws and English MPs can't vote on Scottish ones? But suddenly it's much, much bigger. Are the English to be allowed in this extraordinary torment of ethnicities? Are the English to be allowed to have their own? Which then raises the whole question of what's the relationship between British and all of these other things, between British, in other words, all these hyphenated identities. What is the relationship above all between British and English? We are overwhelmingly the largest group, and we are the one that's least represented. And what's happened instead, of course, is that Labour, and this is the moment again at which I predicted this in all my recent videos have been saying, the Labour Party has ceased to be the party of the working class, and it's become the party of the rampantly powerful, entitled public sector, the sort of person who is represented by the overnighted, overpaid, overindulged Sir Keith, whatever he's called, Mark Rowley. That's what the Labour Party represents, and it is the potential of a police state. But what is going to happen is increasingly nasty, sporadic ethnic violence. What is going to happen is increasing political distrust. Remember, this government may have 2/3 of the seats in the House of Commons. It's elected with the votes of whatever it was, just over 1/3 of those who actually voted, and only 1/5 of the actual electorate. It's the lowest turnout in an election since whenever. And remember again, the moment New Labour comes in 1997, political participation falls off the edge of a cliff. It had been at consistently high levels right through the 20th century after the beginning of full democracy at the end of the First World War. In 97, it falls off the edge of a cliff. I've been blaming Labour a lot.